Robb Stark stood by the great oaken table in the solar of the twin-towered keep at Riverrun, his gaze fixed on the map of the Seven Kingdoms. Candlelight danced along the edges of the parchment, illuminating valleys and rivers, mountains and roads, and the wide swaths of land that separated the north from the southern realms. He was barely more than a boy, not quite 18, yet the weight of kings and lords had descended upon his shoulders. Word had reached him of his father's imprisonment in King's Landing, and of the threat to the Stark name. His mother, Lady Catelyn, waited near the door with a face drawn in grief and a heart filled with steel. The call had gone out, the banners were summoned. Northern lords and knights would rally to Robb's cause, with him as their chosen leader. His father was lost to him for the moment, but the North would not stand idle while Ned Stark knelt at the whim of a vicious boy-king or worse, his mother, the Queen Regent. Yet in that quiet moment, with the wind shrieking outside the walls and the Tully fish flapping on the banners, Robb found himself wavering. Even with his men, even with his mother's counsel, the fight ahead was daunting. The Lannisters were powerful. The crown sat in the Red Keep, and there was the rumor of Stannis Baratheon sending ravens from Dragonstone, proclaiming himself the rightful king, while Renly Baratheon, the younger brother, had mustered a great host in the south and declared himself king in Highgarden's rose-laden courts. Talk of war crackled across the realm. He looked to his mother. She gave him a curt nod. "We must do more than march, my son," she said. "We must choose allies." Robb drew in a breath. The Riverlands were battered by the Lannisters, so it made sense to consider any alliance that might turn the tide swiftly. After the whispers reached them that Renly Baratheon's banners included the strength of Highgarden and the vast armies of the Reach, it seemed only wise to gauge his intentions. Would Renly see sense and help restore Ned Stark? Or would Renly simply demand the North's submission in return for support? Lady Catelyn's counsel was cautious, but she had also heard rumors that Renly Baratheon wished to wed Margaery Tyrell, thereby binding the wealth and might of House Tyrell to his cause. There was already a powerful alliance forming in the south. If the North and the Riverlands joined them, the Lannisters might be crushed swiftly, and Ned Stark could be freed before any more harm befell him. Robb lifted his eyes from the map. "Summon our fastest riders," he said, voice low but resolute. "We ride south to parley with Renly Baratheon." So the decision was made, and the news spread that Robb Stark, calling himself Warden of the North in his father's absence, some even whispered King in the North, though he had not taken that title yet, would march his armies south, not to wage war on all fronts immediately but to treat with Renly Baratheon. Steel rang in the castle yards from dawn till dusk as men sharpened swords, repaired armor, and readied the war horses. The sound of horns echoed across the moors. The Great John roared his approval at any chance for a fight, and the other northern lords followed suit, though some still whispered that it would be better to strike at the Lannisters while they roamed the Riverlands. Robb held them back, trusting his mother's wisdom. A bigger alliance would better serve them. News arrived that Renly Baratheon was encamped near the fortress of Bitterbridge, where the Reach lords flocked to his cause. No small host followed Renly, for Mace Tyrell had seemingly thrown all the might of Highgarden behind him. Even before hostilities began in earnest, the banners of the Flower were said to be a glorious sight across the fields, outnumbering many a smaller force in Westeros. With such a powerful ally, perhaps the war could be short. The journey south was not without peril. Lannister outriders roamed the countryside, and the scars of skirmishes with Gregor Clegane's marauders still smoked through villages. Robb had to be quick and cunning, leading a column of horse and foot across winding roads, mindful of watchers in the hills. He kept his army tight, and though the men were untested, they were fiercely loyal. The memory of Ned Stark's capture lit a fire in their hearts. They crossed the Red Fork of the Trident where the current ran swift and cold, and continued past the burned remnants of farmland once belonging to Lord Vance. The Riverlands were ravaged. Here and there, they passed peasants who cursed the Lannisters. Old men spat in the dust as the northern host rode by, praying the Starks would bring them justice. Robb Stark felt the weight of their hope. Lady Catelyn rode beside him at times, and other times she ventured ahead to speak with the outriders, making sure all was well. Her face had grown lined over the last weeks, the anxiety of Ned's imprisonment wearing at her heart. Still, she managed to keep her composure. Robb sometimes felt her eyes upon him, measuring his resolve. After nearly a fortnight of careful marching, sending out scouts far to the flanks to avoid any Lannister ambush, they came upon word that Renly's host was no longer at Bitterbridge but had marched further east, closer to the Rose Road, a wide thoroughfare that snaked through the heart of the Reach and up toward King's Landing. Renly had apparently declared his intention to claim the Iron Throne, ignoring the claims of his elder brother, Stannis, and calling all loyal men of the realm to join him. The memory of how abruptly King Robert's line had ended, and how Joffrey, the so-called Boy King, sat the throne, made uneasy allies of many. Though Robb had once admired King Robert from afar, that admiration was tempered by the knowledge of what the crown had done to his father. The realm was fracturing, and if the North did not choose wisely, the Starks' ancient line could be forever broken. They left the Riverlands behind at last, forging a path that would bring them to Renly's army. The fields grew greener as they entered the outskirts of the Reach. The people here were better fed and less war-torn. The roads were safer, though that was due more to the Tyrell patrols than any sense of peace. Once they passed the old fortress known as the Cockleswint, the hills began to roll gently, marked by flourishing orchards. Occasionally, Robb's outriders encountered Tyrell horsemen. These men wore bright green cloaks pinned by golden roses. Instead of engaging in battle, both sides merely raised a hand in greeting and parted. Word spread quickly. The young wolf was on his way to meet the would-be king who wore a stag crowned. Eventually, the bulk of the northern forces established a temporary camp near a wide, shallow river, under orders to wait. Robb would go forward with a smaller escort to meet Renly Baratheon in person. Lady Catelyn insisted on accompanying him. Lord Roose Bolton, the Great John, and a handful of the other northern bannermen joined. They brought only a token guard, for if this meeting were to bear fruit, they had to show some trust. Still, Robb kept Grey Wind close, and more than one set of northern eyes watched the horizon for any sign of trickery. The day dawned bright and warm, the clouds drifting softly across a pale blue sky. The countryside was lush, the grass tall and swaying, dotted here and there with wild roses and goldenrod. When at last Renly's encampment came into view, Robb was taken aback by the sheer size of it. Hundreds upon hundreds of tents sprawled across the fields, a veritable city of canvas and banners. The banners themselves were a riot of color. Golden roses on green fields, bright burgundies and yellows, the crowned stag of Baratheon, and dozens of other sigils that declared the presence of lesser lords sworn to the Tyrells and Storm's End. Renly Baratheon himself emerged at the head of an honor guard. He wore a finely wrought breastplate chased with gold, stylized antlers rising from his helmet. But at his side, Robb saw Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, bright and beautiful as the stories claimed, wearing ornate plates set with golden filigree shaped like vines. Robb felt a stir of nerves. He was no green boy, he had commanded men on the march, but he had never done something this grand, this political. Renly removed his helmet and offered a courteous bow. He was a handsome man, with dark curls and a winning smile, though there was a certain glint of ambition in his eyes. "Lord Stark," he said, "I am pleased you accepted my invitation to come. I had feared you might be detained by the Lannisters' treachery along the way." Robb dismounted, passing the reins to one of his men. Grey Wind stayed near, hackles just slightly raised. "King Renly," Robb said in a measured tone. He knew courtesy demanded he acknowledge Renly's claimed title, even if it was contested by Stannis. "And Lady Catelyn," Renly added, inclining his head toward her, "it is an honor to receive you. My men are at your service while you remain in our camp." Lady Catelyn nodded in return, her face composed. "We come in the spirit of mutual purpose. My son, Robb, leads the North, and we seek the safe release of my husband, Lord Eddard Stark, and justice against those who harmed him." Renly's eyes flickered. "I intend to bring justice to the realm, my lady. The Lannisters' hold on King's Landing is tenuous, and soon I mean to ride for the city. Before that, I hoped I might speak with Robb Stark to discuss a possible partnership. They entered the encampment, weaving between the rows of tents. Men-at-arms nodded respectfully as Robb and his party passed. Robb caught glimpses of the Tyrell men, their armor polished, their spirits high. There was an abundance of food, from roasted meats to fresh fruit, the bounty of the Reach. It was a stark contrast to the half-rations and sparse supplies Robb's men had trudged with through the riverlands. Renly brought them to a large pavilion at the center of the camp. Inside, the atmosphere was surprisingly calm. A long table had been set up, strewn with maps, along with pitchers of chilled wine and goblets of polished silver. The edges of the tent were guarded by knights bearing Renly's stag sigil, as well as the rows of House Tyrell. Robb saw Marjorie Tyrell seated to one side, speaking quietly with Lord Mace Tyrell and his daughter, the fair and sharp-eyed lady who was rumored to soon become Renly's queen. Ser Loras Tyrell inclined his head politely to Robb and his companions. He was every bit as beautiful as the songs claimed, but Robb saw more than beauty in him. Ser Loras was lithe and strong, a fighter. There was a controlled tension in the way he moved, as though he were always poised for battle. Renly gestured for Robb to sit. "We have much to discuss," he said, taking the seat at the head of the table. "I will be frank. The Lannisters hold King's Landing through deception. Joffrey is no true Baratheon, this much the realm should know by now. Lord Eddard discovered the truth, which is why the Lannisters imprisoned him, to silence him. I intend to claim the throne that should have been mine upon my brother's death. My older brother, Stannis, has hidden away on Dragonstone, but I have the support of the Reach. With your support as well, the kingdom can be freed from Lannister rule." "And your father, Lady Catelyn," he said, turning to address her directly, "can be released." Robb felt his heart pounding in his chest. "We want my father freed without harm. The Lannisters must also answer for their attacks on the Riverlands." Renly nodded. "And they shall. If you march with me, I promise you that once we oust the Lannisters, your father will be exonerated. We will restore him to his rightful seat in the north, and your house will not be molested by the crown. I will need loyal supporters in the north, for I intend to unite these lands again under a just rule. Let the Targaryen madness remain dead, and let the Lannisters hold no more sway in the Red Keep." Ser Loras cleared his throat. "We can also promise that the Tyrell host will be at your disposal, Lord Stark, should you have enemies to quell in the west or elsewhere. The Tyrells do not forget allies." There was a moment of quiet. Robb glanced at his mother. Her face remained calm, but beneath that outward composure, he sensed her desire to see Ned freed, to save Sansa and Arya if they were still in the capital. Robb himself felt the tug of duty. The men of the north had come south to defend their lord, but forging an alliance with Renly Baratheon, was that the best way? Renly was younger than Stannis, less rigid, and he had the might of the Tyrells. By all accounts, Stannis would be a harsh ruler, unyielding, and perhaps suspicious of the North's intentions. "I need to know," Robb said carefully, "what place the North will have in your new kingdom. I will fight for my father, for my house, for the people who look to me for guidance. The North remembers every slight. We will not be pawns." Renly pressed his palms flat on the table. "I would have you as wardens of the North, confirmed by the crown. Your father's seat at Winterfell would be unchallenged. When the war is done, and the realm is united, we shall have lasting peace between the crown and the great lords of Westeros." A small smile tugged at the corners of Marjorie Tyrell's lips. She studied Robb from across the table. "Peace is sorely needed, my lord." Her voice was soft, but there was a steel in her eyes. "Too many suffer as these petty conflicts tear the kingdom apart." Robb weighed their words. He had heard that Renly was affable, well-liked, charismatic, yet lacked the experience of older rulers. But with the Tyrell strength behind him, the name King Renly carried weight. If Robb refused, he would face the Lannisters alone, or possibly align with Stannis Baratheon, who had fewer allies. The risk was high. Lady Catelyn said, "We must also ensure that any alliance between the North and the new crown respects our independence to choose our own wardens. and to protect our own. When our armies march, they do so to secure justice." Renly nodded. "Of course, you have my word. And once I take the throne, I will see your father pardoned, freed. Let his good name stand unblemished in the histories." Robb steeled himself, remembering how his father used to speak of duty, honor, and the need to protect one's people. Now, the entire North looked to him to make the right choice. Slowly, he extended a hand across the table. "Then we have an accord, Your Grace. We will ally with you, in exchange for the safe return of my father and an assurance that the North's traditions and rights will not be trampled upon." Renly clasped his hand firmly. "We are agreed. Our armies will march together." A cheer rose from the men around the table, though it was subdued by the knowledge that this war had only just begun. Lady Catelyn sat back, relief warring with the tension that still knotted her brow. The great Jon let out a raucous laugh and slapped his thigh, eager for the promise of a grand battle. Roose Bolton smiled a small, calculating smile, one that made Robb uneasy, but he would keep a close eye on the man. Ser Loras Tyrell bowed slightly. "We shall prepare a feast this evening to mark our alliance. King Renly wishes it." Renly nodded. "Yes, let us eat, drink, and celebrate. Tomorrow we plan the campaign." That night, the Tyrells proved their reputation for lavishness. One of the grand tents was turned into a dining hall of sorts, with tapestries from Highgarden hung from the supports, and a great many tables arranged in rows. Servants rushed in and out bearing trays laden with roast duck, spiced boar, fresh bread, cheeses, and the sweetest fruits of the reach. Wine flowed freely, dark reds from the arbor, delicate whites from the coasts. Musicians played lively tunes on lutes and drums. Robb Stark, though still new to the pageantry of the South, tried to maintain his composure. He exchanged pleasantries with Mace Tyrell, who boomed about the glories of Highgarden and how this alliance would end all trouble in the land. Marjorie Tyrell drifted gracefully through the feast, occasionally passing near Robb's table to offer a polite smile or a word of welcome. Lady Catelyn stayed close to her son, sometimes offering counsel in hushed tones. Renly himself was in high spirits, laughing and clapping knights on the back, raising toasts to the downfall of the Lannisters. But Robb noticed that whenever Renly's eyes found Ser Loras across the tent, there was a momentary spark between them that told of their private closeness. It was rumored in whispers, of course, but Robb paid it no mind. If their alliance held, he had no quarrel with Renly's personal affections. As the night wore on and the feast began to wind down, Robb's men found themselves talking battle plans with some of the southern knights. Old Lord Randall Tarly was there, too, a stern-faced bannerman of the Tyrells, eyeing the young wolf with a mixture of respect and guarded caution. Tarly, known for his discipline and skill in warfare, asked pointed questions about the North's readiness for a protracted campaign. Robb answered as best he could, trying to project confidence. Eventually, as the torches burned low, Robb excused himself and strode out into the cooler night air. The wide camp still buzzed with energy, though many had already retired to their tents or bedrolls. He found a small rise just beyond the rows of tents and stood there, looking up at the stars. The new alliance, so swiftly forged, felt like a momentous turning point in his life. Could it truly bring his father back safely? Could they break the Lannisters before they did more harm? He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Lady Catelyn, her cloak drawn around her shoulders. Her auburn hair, threaded with silver, caught the moonlight. "It was a good feast," she said softly. "Aye," Robb agreed, "but a feast is not a victory. The real test comes when we face the Lannisters in battle, or if the crown resists Renly's claim." She placed a hand on his arm. "Renly has a large host, and he's well liked by many of the lords. Perhaps we can take King's Landing quickly, and your father will be saved before they can harm him." Robb's voice caught slightly. "I only pray it happens in time." The next morning, the Alliance found its first real test. Scouts reported that a Lannister force was advancing along the Mander River, perhaps to disrupt the Tyrell supply lines. Immediately, Renly's war council convened. Robb joined them beneath the sprawling map in the main pavilion. Lord Mace Tyrell stood with his round belly pressing against ornate armor. "We should meet them head-on," he boomed. "My knights will ride them down." But Randall Tarley, calm and measured, disagreed. "They might be trying to lure us away from our plan to march on King's Landing. If we send too large a force to chase shadows by the Mander, Tywin Lannister might strike elsewhere." Renly looked to Robb. "What does the young wolf think?" Robb shifted his stance, arms folded across his chest. "If this Lannister force is substantial, we cannot afford to ignore it. They could ravage the Reach and cut our supply lines. We should send a smaller detachment to deal with them, perhaps some of the Tyrell Knights, supplemented by Northern Outriders, while the main army continues preparations to move east." Ser Loras Tyrell spoke up. "I will lead the detachment, Your Grace, if you see fit. Let me chase them from our lands." Renly seemed inclined to agree. "Very well, Ser Loras. Take a force large enough to ensure victory, but do not overextend. We ride for King's Landing soon."